So, does Bitcoin have a delta? Hey, good morning, options traders. Well, this is a question that was posed to me by another trader, and it made me realize that if somebody asks this question, that they're not really fully understanding the concept of delta. And so I thought the answer might help everybody here who's been a little fuzzy about the concept of delta with options. So let's go find out, does Bitcoin have a delta? And if so, what is it? Well, to remember what delta is, a quick refresher, is that it's one of our Greek measures. It's just a mathematical output from a pricing model, and it tells us the sensitivity of an option's price in relation to changes in the stock's price. So if the stock goes up a little bit, 50 cents or so, how much is my option going to appreciate? Or if the stock goes down 30 cents, how much will my option lose? That's what it means to be a sensitivity measure. So as an easy example, let's say the stock is trading for 100 and you have the $100 call trading for 5. You look at your broker's platform and it shows that you have a delta of 0.6, or sometimes we just call that delta 60 because each contract controls 100 shares. So now let's say that the stock rises $1. Right now it's an immediate move, one full dollar. Well, most traders, at least new traders, would think that that $100 call is also going to rise $1, because after all, it gives them the right to buy the shares. And that's almost correct. The problem is we're not real sure that this option is going to be in the money. And right now it's to your advantage to not exercise it just in case the stock falls. So no, that option is not going to rise a full dollar. How much will it pick up? Delta. Delta tells us, at least one interpretation, that this option is going to pick up 60% of that stock move. So if the stock rises $1, your option's going to pick up about 60% of that move, and therefore your option's price is not going to go from 5 to 6, it's going to go from 5 to 560. And that's what it means to have a delta of 60. Now, of course, once the stock makes that move, or once your option makes that move, it's going to generate a new delta. So this is why option traders are particularly sensitive to this concept of delta, because it is changing. Not only do we want to know how sensitive the option is, but we want to know when and why it's going to change. But that doesn't mean that other assets don't have deltas. So the key insight for this video is that every asset has a delta. It's simply the sensitivity of a position, something that you own or something that you've shorted, but it's a position in your account in relation to the underlying. So if you have 100 shares of stock, you've got 100 deltas. Stock goes up $1, you make $100. You make 100 times the change in that stock's price. If the stock falls $30, you're going to be down $30. So that's really what it means to be delta 1. It's just like a mirror. You're just reflecting exactly the movements in the stock in terms of your P&L. Well, Bitcoin is no different. Bitcoin has a delta, and it would simply be the number of coins that are owned. So, of course, most people don't own a full coin. So let's say that you had 0.25 of a coin. You've got a quarter of a coin. Well, you've got a delta of 0.25. Or again, in round terms, you might say I've got 25 deltas. And all that means is that your position is going to move at 25% of the change in the actual Bitcoin. So for instance, here's a profit and loss graph. Let's say that you paid $40,000 for your quarter of a coin. If you had purchased a full coin instead, you would be sitting on this black line. Your profit and loss would rise dollar for dollar and lose dollar for dollar with the underlying coin. So check it out. Let's say the Bitcoin goes from 40,000 to 41,000. That's an increase of 1,000. What's your P&L? Look straight up to the black line, and right where it touches, no surprises, you'd be up 1,000 as well. If Bitcoin goes from 40,000 to 45,000, an increase of 5,000, we look straight up. Right where it touches, we look left. Again, no surprises. You're up 5,000 because the coin went up 5,000. And of course, it's going to work in the reverse on the way down. If Bitcoin falls from 40,000 down to 35,000, we look left, we come all the way down, and right where it touches the black line, you would also be down 5,000. So whenever you see a line like this on this 45-degree angle, it's a delta 1 position. And that's exactly what shares of stock will look like, or a full Bitcoin. You're just rising and falling in relation to the underlying asset itself. But if you had a quarter of a coin, you're not going to look like this. You're going to have 25% of the slope. It's going to be flatter. And a flatter slope means you're not as sensitive. It's not as risky. That doesn't mean that Bitcoin is not risky. It's just saying that if you have a quarter of a coin, it's not as risky as having a full coin. And because you have only a quarter of a coin, your P&L is 25% that of the actual underlying. So again, take a look. The coin moves from 40,000 to 44,000. If you had a full coin, we look straight up, that would be a gain of 4,000 to you. But if you have a quarter of a coin, we look straight up, it's only a gain of 1,000. It's 25% of a full coin. That's what it means to have a 25 delta. If you had only 1/10 of a coin, it's going to be flatter than this in red. It's going to look like that, getting pretty close to zero. And so now, if the coin makes a $1,000 move, you're picking up 10% of that, or $100. So again, the main point to understand is that the delta is simply the sensitivity of your position in relation to the underlying. So if you have Bitcoin, you have the underlying. So the question is, how sensitive is it to changes in the underlying? Well, how much of a coin do you have? And there's your answer. So once again, just to be clear, the reason that stock traders and Bitcoin traders typically don't talk about delta is that it's very obvious. It's a straight line. It's just how big is your position. Do you see how these lines are straight? They never ever change unless you were to buy more or sell some. That's the only way you're going to change the angles of these lines. But see, that's not true for an option. If you have a $100 call, at expiration, this is our risk graph in blue, but in red is the risk graph today. So see, it's not a straight line like we saw with Bitcoin. So in the case of the option, if the stock is down here somewhere, you're sitting on an angle, but only about at this type of an angle, fairly flat, but not forever. And then if the stock moves up into here, you can see that that red line is getting more sloped. It's starting to move a little bit, let's say to the north. It's starting to point higher on the chart. If the stock moves up into here, you're moving a little bit higher. Your position is becoming more sensitive. And then finally, if the stock happens to get way up here, you're pointing almost the same angle as this blue, which means you're almost 100 shares. And of course, yes, if the stock keeps going, or if time passes, that you will eventually be delta 1. But if that's hard to see, extend these lines out. See, look at this first position right here. If we pretended that the option just stayed on the same line of sensitivity, it would be just like shares of stock or a Bitcoin. But notice that the red line doesn't stay on it forever. It eventually pulls away. See, now you're up to this portion. And again, the red line doesn't stay on it for very long. It eventually pulls away from it. If you come up to this one, again, for a very small portion, that red line will match it, but it eventually moves away from it. And that is until you get to delta 1 or delta 0. But the point is that when you have an option that your deltas or your sensitivities change. And that's why it's so important and so critical to understand not only the concept of delta as an options trader, but when it's going to change, how much it's going to change, and why it's going to change. There's a lot of reasons why your delta will change. It is not simply from changes in the stock's price. So I hope that helps to clarify some of the issues that people have with delta. So in this case, rather than talking about it so much from an option standpoint, which I think is where this trader got confused, let's back it down a little bit and make it really easy. Let's talk about it in terms of Bitcoin. So if you understand how sensitive your position is in relation to shares of stock or in relation to Bitcoin, that's all that delta is. Again, the trick for understanding with the options is that it doesn't stay constant, at least not until you get to expiration. And for anyone who'd like to learn more about the art and science of options trading, please check out the Alpha Trader course, Strategy Lab, and a technical analysis course. You can find it all at optionsatoz.com. Also, please join us on the Facebook trading group, Options A to Z, and you can find a link in the description below.